Okay, this says I'm live, and I think there's a few people in here. If there's anybody out there, you guys, somebody posted something up in the comments or something just saying that you can see me, hear me, anything along those lines. That would be much appreciated. And while I wait, I will just have a sip of my drink. Hello. I'm assuming the hellos mean you can hear me, so that's that is sort of my hope and my expectation. Otherwise, this is going to be a very, very short live stream. Can you guys hear me okay? Like there's echo, sound seems okay? Just tuning in, getting a couple of hellos. Or sounds good. Perfect. That is the slew of confirmation that I'm hoping for. Hold the questions for a couple of minutes. Привет, Max. I'm glad that everyone is here. We've done a few of these live streams in the past. I mean, I'm the guy that gets to show up and do these. We've done a few of these in the past, but they've always been sort of either like early, like not early morning, but sort of mid-morning or afternoon type thing. But now that I have an actual office space that I get to work from, I can sort of do these in the evenings as well, and just sort of try to mix up the time zones a little bit for those who might like to participate and sort of watch me do this and stumble over this in a live form. I apologize for the blankness of the wall behind me. I have wall art on order that was supposed to be here earlier this week, but it has not yet shown up. So thank you very much to the firm that gave me a firm yes, we can have it delivered for you by then, and then it didn't show up in time for then. So it's still a blank wall. Hopefully by the next one of these that I do, we'll actually get something that's actually up there. So what kind of wall art? It's actually like a stylized map of the world. Something a little, not just I was thinking it's like, it's a history channel, like, having a map seems de rigueur. It seems like something that we should do. Always have a map to be able to refer to, but I didn't want just a standard world map. I was looking for something a little bit funkier, a little bit different, and I found something. But as I said, it doesn't look like it's going to show up. So maybe at some point it will. So that's hopefully in time for the next one. There will actually be something behind me, and it won't just be my face against the paint like in the background here. So what time do we have here? 7:32. I'm gonna wait another minute or so, a couple of minutes, then we'll get started. Usual format for this, for anyone who hasn't had the chance to actually sort of tune in. I'm going to do a short little presentation. It's more just like some ideas and thoughts that I scribbled down earlier this week based on some things that I was thinking about. Maybe hopefully give some grist for the mill for you guys to be able to think about and sort of to consider. It's not particularly a controversial opinion or anything, but just one of those things that occurred to me while I was having a conversation with some people. So yeah, and then we'll sort of, that'll take me a few minutes, not usually more than about. If it's more than 5 minutes, I'd actually be surprised. And then just sort of open things up to Q&A, and we can have a little chat, and people can ask questions about this, that, whatever. I will always endeavor to do the answer to the best of my ability. I won't lie to you. I promise that. I might not be able to answer your questions, but I will certainly endeavor to do my best. So based on that, actually, no, John Bruce McGurk, there is no Comrade Stalin on my wall. Those two posters that are sort of posted up on this side here, they're both anti-alcohol posters from the Soviet period, really more stylized from the 30s. But they're anti-alcohol as opposed to anything to do with Comrade Stalin. So that's how that works. And as for actually me following along with those thoughts, I tend to ignore those, and I'm going to have a small drink while we participate here anyways. So there we go. Okay, so on that note, there's my dogs, if you can hear that in the background. Excellent. They'll settle down in a few minutes here. But in the meantime, why don't we just jump into this? So I want to talk about predictability. and predictability specifically to the Cold War, but it can apply to a much wider range of things too. And I'm going to be reading here a little bit, but bear with me. I've moved these. I've got two monitors, so I've got the actual text that I'm going to be reading from right in front of me, and I will probably keep glancing over to the side because this is where the actual the thread is moving at the moment. But anyways, so I was recently on a museum tour with a group of Second World War historians and enthusiasts, and during a break for lunch, we were all sitting and chatting about our own specific interests, sort of what motivates us to study what we do. I was the lone Cold War historian in the group, which made me somewhat of an oddity. That is something I've come to grips with in the meantime, of course. But some of the group were asking me questions about the time period that I studied, that being the Cold War. And one of the questions that really stood out in my mind was when one of the group asked what was the most dangerous part of the Cold War. And I gave the standard, and to be honest, it's the true answer that as a single focused moment, the Cuban Missile Crisis was the most dangerous, like the actual most dangerous moment of the Cold War. But as I tend to do, I sort of rambled on a little bit and I gave an alternate answer of, I guess, of a year, and it's 1983. And I was met with a lot of confusion and a lot of sort of blank stares when I actually used that as my answer, because people didn't really have any idea what I was talking about. So I explained a little, and I explained that it's a series of events that happened that year that included Operation Ryan. There was the Beirut barracks bombings, the Glickam deployments into Europe, the invasion of Grenada, KAL-007, U.S. Navy exercises in the Sea of Okhotsk, and finally in November of that year, Operation Reforger, and culminating in Able Archer. And as I went through this really long list of all these like events that each individually ratcheted things up through that year, the group kind of looked a little stunned. Most of the group knew about the events individually, but they never really had the opportunity to, or sort of thought to string it all together to understand how dangerous the global situation was in 1983 as a result of all of those things coming together. And so let's talk about why that combination all made it so dangerous. And this is ultimately the point of what I'm going to talk about here. And it's the lack of one thing that made things truly dangerous that year and could really threaten the peace in any year. And it's a lack of predictability. Safety and security during the Cold War relied on predictability. If both sides continued to do what was anticipated of them, then there was far less reason to worry about what was going to happen. For those of you who have seen the movie, The Hunt for Red October, and let's be honest, if you haven't seen that, you really should fix that as fast as humanly possible. But for those of you, and I'm assuming it's most of you who have seen it, there's a scene where Jack Ryan is discussing the defection of the Soviet sub with Admiral Josh Painter. I think it's on the aircraft carrier. And the line in the movie from Painter is, "The Russians don't take a dump, son, without a plan." And well, clearly, it's not an actual factual statement. The sentiment behind it is accurate. The Soviet military was one of routine. Soldiers followed the same processes and procedures day after day to the point that observers would know what to anticipate as normal. Ongoing intelligence gathering, whether it's SIGINT, OSINT, ELINT, HUMINT, and all the other kinds of INT that's out there, it's very much based around the idea of looking for disruptions in routine, deviations from the norm. Militaries work on procedures, set ways and patterns of operating. So when something changes, whether that's a new weapon system, a new protocol, some sort of, it can be even like the surprise movement of troops or whatever that happens to be, that puts the other side onto alert. When you look at Cold War history, those are the moments when things are the most dangerous, when unexpected things happen simply because the other side can't be sure if it's just something new or if it's possibly leading to the start of an attack. The crisis in Lebanon in 1958, and we did an episode on this, it's actually a great example of this when the US deployed soldiers, they deployed Marines into Lebanon to try to stabilize the situation in the country. The Soviets didn't know if it was part of a wider move against them, and they actually moved to a significantly higher alert status, including a higher nuclear alert status. Another example of that is the man who saved the world. It's Stanislav Petrov. He ignored what his early warning systems were telling him about a US nuclear launch simply based on a hunch that it didn't fit the normal pattern of behavior. It didn't make sense. There wasn't anything else happening that sort of indicated everything else was normal. Why would there suddenly be this bolt from the blue? At the end of the day, the ability to anticipate what the other side was going to do in any given situation is what helped keep the peace and kept the Cold War cold. predictability keeps the peace. So there we go. That's my little spiel there. As I said, like I was sitting, I did a museum tour with some friends, and we were sitting having lunch, and it's sort of like this idea that predictability is really one of the key things that kept the peace for so long. And every episode that we do week over week, where there's something, like most of them, not all of them, but most of them, where we talk about some event where something changed, and there was some sort of rapid ratcheting of tensions, or whatever that happens to be. That's because predictability went out the door. There was a loss of predictability, and that's when things get really tense, because nobody knows what the other side is going to do. If the other side is continuing to do what's expected of them, that's business as usual, and things continue as they are. So that's my 2 cents. I don't know what. I'm sure I will hear lots of maybe not lots, but at least some feedback from people over these thoughts and everything. But yeah, that's this is what I do when I'm not doing schoolwork or daytime work or reading a book or whatever it happens to be. These are the ideas, and I figured, let's start slapping some of them down onto put pen to paper, write them out, and from time to time I'm going to present them to you guys like this. So that's my 2 cents there. So yeah. Yeah. So let's go. I'm going to start looking through some of these questions. I know there's lots of people sort of asking things in here. And I will hopefully, I don't know if you guys agree or disagree, and that's fine. There's room for interpretation in this. So it's not like, it's not like there isn't scope for debate or discussion or anything. Pixel asking a question: are there going to be any field reports blogging from important places in history? If by that, Pixel, you mean, are we going to ever go out and actually do some field episodes? We are working on something right now. We're trying to solidify some dates, but hopefully at some point in the near-ish future, we'll get something where it's not me sitting in studio, not me sitting here in my office, but instead sitting somewhere in the middle of some interesting places in history that are certainly directly Cold War is where we'd like to start. But hopefully to do some actual on-scene footage, and me standing in the street and doing what I do, but just do it somewhere different and with a little bit more realistic background. So that is an absolute goal that we're working towards. As I said, we're trying to nail down and figure out some dates that to make it work. So yes. Channel is amazing from Belgium. Thank you very much. That's the first thing I want to do is start talking crap about Belgium. It's like not a real country. It shouldn't exist. No, I'm kidding. That's Belgium is a real country and has been since like 1830. So, or something along those lines. So, will we make an episode about the forced repatriation of Soviet citizens in the aftermath of the Second World War? Hank, we actually did. We did an episode on the fate of POWs, and we did. That was the big one regarding Soviet citizens. We did a separate episode on the expulsions of ethnic Germans. That was a separate episode, but we did do an episode on POWs where we did look at the fate of repatriated Soviet citizens, whether they were coming out of prisoner of war camps or DP camps or whatever that happened to be. It's an older episode. I think it was probably in the first 6 months of the life of the channel. So production quality and presentation quality probably isn't as great as it would be if we redid it now. But yeah, there is an episode there. So Tyler, when will we do more about Africa during the Cold War? Rhodesia, Congo, Mozambique. Yeah, that's actually, it's a great question. Africa as a hotbed of Cold War activities really doesn't sort of like get going in a big independent way anyways until into the 1960s through the decolonization process, which, I mean, some people who have like listened to me rattle on about this before, we are trying to follow a vague sort of timeline. We're sort of loosening up on it more and more as we go. But we're pushing through into this. Like we've covered a lot of stuff from the 40s and the 50s. We're pushing certainly into the 50s. Into the 60s, and we'll be moving up into the 70s and whatnot. So expect to see more on. I'd like to do a follow-up episode on the Congo episode that we did do. Obviously, with Mozambique and Angola, with the Portuguese wars of decolonization. We actually still need to do an episode on Salazar in Portugal before we can really get to anything to do with like Portuguese decolonization, but all those things. Look for those in the coming future. We know that we haven't really touched them a whole lot, but we certainly want to because they are really quite fascinating. And in some of them, especially with the Portuguese wars, I think they're rather underserviced certainly in the English language sphere. So that's looking forward to getting into that. This is a good question. How long? Oh wait, where did it go? There we go. How long did U.S. foreign policy leaders think the Cold War would last? Forever. And it's, as you said, like, Kissinger, love him or hate him, and I certainly don't make my opinion of him, like, I don't hide my opinion of Kissinger, but he thought the Cold War was the new status quo that would go on for centuries. That was very much the thinking. There was no analyst thought that the Cold War had a shelf life. That was the status quo. That status quo really is the word. Like, that really was how people looked at it, how people viewed it, how people expected it to continue. That was the norm that was going to exist. Was that the Cold War, whether it was, various degrees of frigidity or thawing, or it's like a sort of this cyclical thing that might have happened. But the end of the Cold War, like the fall of the Berlin Wall, that nobody saw that. Nobody in any meaningful positions saw that coming. The collapse of the Soviet Union, the same thing. No one expected the Soviet Union to disappear. Like, that was certainly not in 1986, not even 1988. 1989, maybe you might have started seeing some rumblings that things weren't going to last the way that they had been. But it really wasn't until sort of like the summer to the fall of 1990 that like the possibility of an actual collapse of the Soviet Union as a country. Not that the Soviet Union was sort of the be all and end all of the Cold War, but very much this idea that the Cold War didn't have a shelf life. It wasn't going to end at any point. If you'd asked anybody in the Reagan administration, like, the Cold War was forever. That's how they planned. That's a great question. Professor, what book is the best overview of the Cold War? I would say right now, currently, just in terms of a general overview of the Cold War, Odd Arne Vestad's The Cold War is probably your best bet. I think it's 2017, 2018. So it's probably, and it certainly isn't a deep focus or anything, but it's huge. It's definitely a sizable tome, but it's a really good look at sort of the whole Cold War period, sort of where it came from, how it sort of proceeded, and looking at its end. And it's based on relatively newish sources, based on the 2017 publication date. I want to say 2017, but it's Odd Arne Vestad. That would be the book that I would recommend in terms of looking for just a general overview. Really good book. You could also look at John Lewis Gaddis. He's had some things, but he is a little less balanced. He's very much a U.S. foreign policy guy, and that's the angle, and that's the lens that he looks at things through. Is very much this American lens. So. Lawrence Luthi has his The Cold Wars, is an excellent look. He's more focused looking at Asian and Middle Eastern impacts and influences. But again, it's a really good comprehensive look, and that's in the last 3 or 4 years, I want to say. That's worth investigating as well. So, will we cover the life of Vasily and Alexandrovich Arkhipov? Probably not his. Arkhipov. He was the submarine commander during the Cuban Missile Crisis. We're probably not going to look at his life like as an in-depth thing, but we'll certainly be talking about Arkhipov just because you can't talk about him. Like you can't look at the Cuban Missile Crisis without like addressing that, without addressing his influence and certainly impact in terms of avoiding us all getting irradiated. So, yeah. An episode about North Korean architecture. I'll be honest, I don't think we're going to get that specific. I know we just did an episode recently on Soviet architecture. That's a Soviet architecture, though, has the advantage of being a rather sizable and broad topic, because it's obviously it covers like such a really wide wide period and a really wide territory. So there's lots of differentiation in it. That was a really well received episode, actually. I wasn't quite sure how that one was going to break when we released it. I wasn't sure if that was going to be one of those ones where we get like 5,000 views or something on it versus I think we're well over 100,000 views on it at the moment. It was a good, I'd like to think it was a really good episode. I like to think all of our episodes are really good. But that architecture episode, we got to draw in a lot of different things and a lot of different facets and features into it. Doing one specifically on North Korean might be too niche, a little too difficult. And part of that niche is that we need to be able to access sources to be able to talk about it. And I've never been to North Korea. It sounds fascinating and quite interesting, but I've never been to North Korea, and I'm not an architect, and that combination of things makes that difficult. There's also just a lack of source material, although they do have a really big pointy hotel, which is pretty cool. So I don't think they ever finished that, but Kate Adams. Yes, I am a fellow Canadian. Are there plans for a video about Canada in the Cold War? I was at a conference, an academic conference over the last weekend, looking specifically at Canadian military history. And it sort of dawned on me that four and some odd months into this project, we still haven't done an episode on Canada. The closest I think we got was the Guzenko affair. But that wasn't really about Canada so much as it just happened to take place in Canada. So yeah, that's hit my radar as something that I would like to address. I'm probably going to ruffle a few middle-aged white men by doing an episode on the Avro Arrow, the CF-105, and sort of the myths around that, and why the design of the arrow was why it was canceled, and why it made perfect and total logical sense to cancel the arrow. So yeah, that's sort of my idea. It's probably a well-trodden like subject, but it certainly is very Canadian. So Solar Eclipse Myanmar episode. We've done 2 episodes on Myanmar. At some point, we are going to have to pick that thread up again and continue that. Although the history of Myanmar from there continues to be that the army continued to, rule things and govern things with a bit of authoritarian rule. But I'd like to come back to Myanmar just because it is a really interesting. It's a really interesting country. It's a really interesting, fascinating history. The names sometimes throw me for a loop in terms of pronunciation, which I'm sure you guys have all noticed. I don't always have the best record of pronouncing things. But I'd like to come back to Myanmar at some point. Fire score maximum. Will we make a video about the football war between Honduras and El Salvador? Yes, we absolutely will. I couldn't possibly resist the opportunity to do an episode about something called the football war. We will do that. I think it's one of those really interesting stories about. It sounds like it's typical Latin American thing. It's like they're fighting over football. It had nothing. It was a trigger. It had nothing. I shouldn't say it had nothing to do with it, but that was the trigger that sort of spilled over and gave an excuse to be able to start a war that was going to happen regardless. But it's a really interesting sort of one of these things, and it has such a great name. It's a catchy sort of name. So, Lumumba University in Moscow trained a lot of African revolutionaries and returned them to Africa as activists. 100% true, Howard. When I was in Moscow, I was staying in a flat not too far from Lumumba University. They changed the name by the 90s, but Yeah, that's I know that's absolutely what the Soviets were doing, is that they were training African citizens and in engineering, in all kinds of different disciplines, to be able to send them back, um, to be able to help their countries, but also at the same time providing indoctrination and propaganda and all those things. Um, but yeah, that's I mean, the Americans did a lot of the same thing. They happened to do it through the military, like military exchanges. That was a really big way for the Americans to do that. Um, but yeah, it's interesting stories that come out of that. Um, Spets is asking me if I have any opinion on Vostok watches. I, I'll be honest. I don't. I'm not a watch guy. I used to wear watches many years ago, but I was poor. I still am, but I'm not as poor as I was. Um, so I really don't know too much about watches. I was never a watch guy. I never really got into like some they look. I think lots of watches look great, and then you find out that some are worth a few $100s, and then I find out that some are worth some tens of thousands of dollars, and I'm not sophisticated enough to know the difference. So, let's see, where are we here? I've lost my spot. Where was I? There's a lot of questions here, guys. That's holy jeez. Here we go. Why Cold War and not hot peace? I've never really thought of that, but I'm willing to bet that funding has a lot to do with that. It's a lot easier to get funding for a war, no matter how cold it is, rather than getting funding for peace. So that's pure speculation. I have absolutely no idea. Let's see. If Cold War had never happened, do I think nuclear energy would be more prevalent? No idea, to be honest. Yeah, no idea. Like the two work hand in hand. For anybody who's sort of tuned in or has watched me, after these, I'm not a big proponent or a big fan of alternate history. I find that it can sort of be useful to analyze a specific situation with a very specific set of inputs, and you might be able to anticipate what's going to happen one, maybe two moves sort of down the road. But beyond that, there are so many variables and there are so many different occurrences. Never underestimate the role of chance and luck. That I could never speculate whether, do I think that nuclear energy could be more prevalent? Yeah, maybe. But I mean, do I think it could be, fallout before the world blew up? Possibly. I mean, the design aesthetic is cool, but I really don't know. But that's the way that it did happen, was that the Cold War and nuclear weapons and nuclear technology evolved together. One drove the other. The other drove, it's this perpetual motion type thing. Yeah, that would be my answer to that. So, the KGB didn't have analysts like the CIA and the FBI did and do. The KGB did have analysts, but they did. That's sort of the intelligence cycle revolves around this. It's like a loop where it's the politicians, or the people in charge, I should say, let's just put it, the people in charge decide the type. This is what they want to look for. So then they have agents and analysts. They have agents, whether they're domestic or whether they're abroad, whatever it happens to be, that collect that data. That data that gets collated into a report. That report comes to an analyst. The analyst goes through it and does their report on it, and that comes back around. The Soviet model was a little bit different in that the collecting agent could also be doing a lot of the reporting. So there might not necessarily have been the level of analysis, or it might have been sort of a more local analysis. that then went up to a significantly higher level and cut out one of those sections that the U.S. And the West would use. So it's not that they didn't have analysts. It's the analysis might have been happening in a different way, in a different format. Part of the issue with the KGB, it's not to say that it doesn't happen in Western intelligence agencies as well, was that oftentimes the KGB could be told, this is what you're going to look for. And it's very specific, and they're tasked to go find that. And their performance is measured on their ability to find that. And as soon as you do that, then the agent will do whatever it takes that they're going to find that, no matter whether it's particularly real or true, because their performance is going to be measured directly against how much of that task they've been able to fulfill. So it's this, I don't want to call it a negative feedback loop, but it's this self-fulfilling prophecy. If you say that I need you to go find information about soldiers doing X, Y, and Z, you're going to go find soldiers doing X, Y, and Z to maybe possibly to the exclusion of everything else. So there's a different format that's happening there. James Fleming, this is more of a nuts and bolts question. Are we going to create a systemic map that might make it easier to find episodes quickly? The YouTube playlist feature is, I think if I said not good, that would be an understatement. We release I don't like the YouTube playlist stuff. It puts them in order of release, which I think if your channel's doing a bunch of other things, then it's fine, because it's like people are going to watch a couple most recent things, and anything prior to that doesn't really matter because it's old. We're a historical channel. People might want to start at the beginning and watch their way through. YouTube doesn't let us do that. There's no way to reverse the playlist to play in reverse order. There's nothing like that. The way that I would recommend to watch our videos is in the order of release, because I do make reference going back to previous episodes that we've done. The problem with it is that YouTube doesn't give us a lot of functionality to that. So we really should we're well over 200 episodes at this point. So we really should create something to try to help people find find what episodes we've done. I'm going to try to think about that. So that's a really strong comment. Tyler, it feels like Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea are not talked about as much when it comes to their role in Vietnam. Certainly the Anzac forces, Australians and the Kiwis, were absolutely involved and very well involved in Vietnam. They tended to have because it was professional. They were professional forces that were being deployed, as opposed to American conscripts. So in terms of their performance, what they were being measured against, the Australians and the New Zealand troops, were very highly rated and highly regarded from the American side. The South Koreans, we've mentioned this, that they were there. It was South Korean Marine units. They had a reputation for being not particularly kind, or they had a reputation for being kind of brutal. And they aren't really talked about that much. A lot of that, I think, happens to be a function of the war in Vietnam. So much media, when you talk about Vietnam, is very much focused on the American experience, and it's the American side. This is English language stuff, anyways. It's very much focused around that, and there's just such a huge machine, just in terms of volume. The American machine it's huge. So in terms of volume, there's just so much more that's being produced. But I think there needs to be more work. Personally, I think there needs to be more work calling attention to the role of Australia, New Zealand, and certainly South Korea in Vietnam. But by the same token, I think we need to be calling more attention to the role that the Russians did play, that the Chinese did play, how that changed, how that morphed, all of those things. It's two sides. So there's stories there to be told, certainly. Let's go. I'm just going to scroll down here because I realize that you guys are asking more questions than I can possibly answer right now. So, fun fact, your host, David, that's me, does not own a Che Guevara t-shirt. That is a fun fact, and that is indeed a fact. I do not own a Che Guevara t-shirt. I have something about owning t-shirts with mass murderers on it that just really doesn't sit pretty with me. So, for the most part, I think a lot of people who end up buying those t-shirts really don't understand what or who Che Guevara was about anyways. I'm giving people the benefit of the doubt maybe, but yeah, that's, let's see. Luis Felipe Gonçalves, anything coming from South America, specifically about Brazil? Yeah, we haven't done as much on certainly Latin America and South America as we are going to. That's probably, some of that's my fault. Some of it's, and I admit that, some of that's a shortcoming it's a gap in my own knowledge. I know more about what's happening in Chile and Argentina than I do, I'll be honest, than I do really what's happening in Brazil. But that's something that we're going to work to rectify. Well, a lot of countries, like certainly in the cone, and I'm going to include Brazil in that. Certainly no friend of the Soviet Union. They weren't always particularly friendly to Washington either, wanting to try to maintain independence and sort of walk a third line without getting roped into either side of the Cold War. But certainly the strong anti-communist sentiments that existed prevented Moscow from being able to move in. I'm going to use that expression here because I can't think of something better. But it didn't endear them to Washington particularly either. So let's see. What else do we hear? Dave Davis, speaking of Canada, what about the FLQ in Canada? Oh yeah, well, we'll certainly take a look at the FLQ. The FLQ, for those who may not know, was a Quebec independence terrorist cell that was operating in Quebec in the late 60s and the early 70s, to the point that the Prime Minister had to actually enacted the War Measures Act and declared a limited scale of martial law to restore order after a series of bombings and kidnappings. And there's a Marxist connection to that, and it's like boarding a plane and taking it to Cuba and all these things. But yeah, we'll certainly take a look at FLQ stuff. But that seems, in my brain, somehow that seems like it's so much farther in the future than it probably actually is. So let's see. Yeah, there's a few people asking as I scroll down, like I'm suddenly realizing that people have been mentioning the FLQ a few times here. So yeah, that's will we do an episode on the Khmer Rouge? To be honest, Josiah, we're probably going to do more than one episode on Khmer Rouge. It'll probably be at least two. More than that is very possible. The Khmer Rouge has a bunch of different angles to be able to look at. Khmer Rouge, certainly, obviously, like the Pol Pot and genocide inside Cambodia itself, but then its relationship to the Vietnam War and how all of that sort of started, the Cambodian relationship to China. There's a whole bunch of different facets that all sort of play into that, and it is definitely underserviced as a topic, especially in comparison to something like the American War in Vietnam. They're very much intrinsically linked to each other, but we will be looking at Khmer Rouge, absolutely. An Indonesian, somebody from Indonesia, Kerha, I apologize if I'm terribly butchering your name, I'm sure, and I apologize. Just thanking us for covering Confrontasi in West Papua. Yeah, actually, those are topics that I will freely admit here, like I've freely admitted many other times. Indonesian history was like this big black hole for me. I knew nothing about that. 4 years ago, if you'd asked me, like, it's like, was Indonesia important in the Cold War? I would have looked at you with a blank stare because I wouldn't have had any idea what you're talking about. And that's completely on me. I could blame my education through my past, but I'm not going to. That's on me. Indonesian history through the Cold War is absolutely fascinating. And I'm not that I'm looking forward to the genocide of the communist movement, but looking at the GS30 movement, G30S, that genocide, mass murder, I'm very much looking forward to covering that, because it's like bringing that history to a wider audience is really important. I think it's vital that more people know about these things and have a better idea and that it happened in the first place, let alone the details around it. So yeah, let's see. What about the lukewarm conflict? I think this is coming back to the idea, like, it's like the Cold War hot peace. Cold War is actually, like, I'll be honest, it is a terrible, terrible misnomer. It was never for most of it was a Cold War in the West. If you were European or if you were North American, it was a Cold War. If you go to almost anywhere else in the world, they were hot wars. There are millions and millions of people who died as a result of the Cold War. To me, millions and millions of deaths as a result of a Cold War doesn't really make it a Cold War. That's pretty damn hot. So I think it's a terrible name. It's the name that stuck, but that's the name. Very bad. Let's see. El Salvadorian Civil War. Yep, we're going to take a look at certainly take a look at a lot of the wars and the guerrilla struggles, guerrilla struggles that happened in across Latin America, through Central America into South America. Looking at things like the role of liberation theology, which is this whole other sort of weird breed of thing that sort of comes about starting in the 70s, but plays such a huge impact in the way that those wars were conducted and the outcomes. Yeah, that's we will be taking a look at that. Elias, what subject would I cover if I had to choose something other than the Cold War? That's a good top. It's a good question. It's a nice, open, broad question. It's perfect for this type of environment. Thank you. I was fascinated by the Second World War for a very, very long time. Right up until, let's say, probably about 3 months after we started the Cold War project. I'm only joking. I'm only sort of joking about that either. Second World War was always really interesting to me, especially the Pacific theater. But if you ask me right now, if there was something that I was going to pivot to, it would actually probably be the U.S. Civil War. It has captured my imagination. I shouldn't say my imagination, but it's caught my interest in a really big way over the last 5 or 6 months. Absolutely. I have a much better understanding and a better appreciation for how the war was conducted, why it happened the way that it did. And I think it really shows a lot of characteristics of the evolution of warfare through the 19th century, from the beginning of the war. It's only a 4-year war, only. It's only the 4-year war, but from the beginning to the end, like how that sort of changed and evolved. And you can see moving from a sort of this like Jominian tactics to more Clausewitzian. It's really quite a fascinating conflict. So I mean, if I was going to do something other than the Cold War, right now it would actually probably be the American Civil War. But again, ask me in 5 months and I could give you a different answer. So yeah, let's see. What else do we have here? I'm a slow reader, bear with me. That's do I have a collection of stuff from the Cold War era? I do, but it's all packed away in boxes. I don't have a ton of space. So yeah, I've got little, odds and ends and bits and pieces and stuff, but not anywhere. I've never had anywhere really good to be able to display it. I have a very patient and understanding wife. but she's maybe not that patient or understanding. Now that I have an office, I probably need to go find that box and actually sort of see if I can figure out a way to actually display these things. But yeah, that's I do have a small little collection of things. I am missing a piece of the Berlin Wall, and I'm kicking myself for not having picked up a piece of at least the barbed wire from the border between Austria and Hungary, when I could have just gone and snipped some. I'm kicking myself for that, but when you're young and stupid, then you forget. You don't think that anything could possibly come of that, and you'll never have regrets. So regrets later. That's somebody asking if I have Cold War furniture in my living room, or it's only for the videos in the set. So that's actually Pixel. That's actually a really good question, because sort of this is a rather minimal room, and it's probably going to remain a minimal room. This is my office in my house. Our set is actually in my producer's basement. He lives about 40 minutes from here. I was actually just there this morning. We recorded 4 episodes. And that set is a desk. That's what our set consists of. Yeah. So, but that this is definitely a different place from the set, from the office, but it's all very, very minimal. So, yeah, that's. Will we do an episode on the Pentagon Papers? Yeah, we probably will. There's a whole section of stuff on Nixon that and Vietnam, and like there's all these different things. And so the reason I'm looking over there is on my bookshelf. I found a cheap copy of the Pentagon Papers about a month and a half ago. So I'm actually looking over to see where I have that on my bookshelf. And it is just over there. I have yet to crack it open, but yeah, we'll be taking a look at that and explaining what it is and like all those things. So that's yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's see. Somebody advocating for 10 full episodes on the Khmer Rouge. Probably not 10. I think maybe 2 or 3 might be pushing it before people just sort of tune out. You guys are spending a Thursday night hanging out with me for some bizarre and unknown reason. Lots of our viewers are maybe not quite as patient with that. And if we did 10 episodes, you'd see our viewership drop off to practically nothing, I would assume. So, or maybe the 70 of you that are in here, you guys would watch that every week. But yeah, that's probably won't be 10 episodes on the Khmer Rouge. We'll just leave it at that. So, do we ever plan to cover the role of communist parties in France and Italy? Because they were the 2 largest legal communist parties in Western Europe. We really do need to take a look at that, because they do play a really interesting role in Italian and French politics, and it impacts up till into the present day. Like anything in history, it still impacts the present. But we really should go back and take a look at that. Yeah, that's we have quite a long list of things that we really should be taking a look at. So, yes, hello, fellow kids. That's from Set Truth Free. Hello, fellow kids. That picture from the thumbnail and that we used on the community post announcement, that was my Halloween costume from not this past Halloween, but the year before, 2021, I guess that would have been. And that my Steve Buscemi cosplay, that is probably in my 40 some odd years of existence on this planet. That is the best Halloween costume that I have ever put together. And it was super, super cheap. So, but lots and lots of fun to wander around downtown Toronto like that and seeing how many people would say, "How do you do, fellow kids?" So, a couple of people saying that they need to bail, which is sad, but I understand. That's asking if there's going to Henry Kissinger Henry Kissinger did just turn 100 years old, and R. Doherty is asking if there'll be a special episode on Kissinger. I don't know that we need to do a special episode on Kissinger. I mean, we can go ahead and like sort of read about him or talk to him anytime, since Henry Kissinger is possibly never going to die, since he has been feeding on the souls of all the people's deaths that he's responsible for this long. He is not a good person. we will be talking about Henry Kissinger. I don't think we're going to do an exclusive episode on him. Maybe we should. I don't know. But he's going to come up a lot, just because of the sheer significance of the role that he played throughout such a huge part of the Cold War and helping to decide and guide foreign policy. So yeah, that's Jake Haywood asking if we're going to cover the New Zealand anti-nuclear movement of the 70s and 80s. Yeah, absolutely. The birth of environmentalism comes very much directly out of the anti-nuclear movement, whether that's Amchitka Island, whether it's Greenpeace and Rainbow Warrior, whether it's, all of those things all sort of coalesce together. The nascent anti-nuclear movements that evolved into the environmental movements of the 80s, the 90s, and beyond, like Greenpeace and the Sierra Club, and all of those things, all of those have their root in the anti-nuclear movement. And I would be doing everybody a grave disservice if we didn't actually explore that and sort of explain where that all comes from. Really, really fascinating. Let's see. Do we think we'll do videos on if the Cold War has influenced modern culture and society? To be honest, I like to think that wherever possible, we sort of do try to sort of, maybe we don't do this as explicitly as I think that we do. Everything that you see, and the question sort of goes on. What am I trying to say here? Are there cultural hangovers in the present that began from the Cold War? There absolutely are. There's lots of threads that you can sort of pick through that either from before the Cold War and that were magnified and amplified, or they started during the Cold War and they sort of continue through till today. Cultural hangover, I think, is actually a really good expression. The entire idea of McCarthyism, which McCarthyism wasn't the Red Scare of the 50s. That Red Scare wasn't the first Red Scare. The first Red Scare happened in the wake of the First World War. So there's this thread sort of that runs through. But you see lots of echoes of that first Red Scare, the second Red Scare. You see echoes of that coming back now in the present, where the idea of anything that somebody doesn't like is that they must be communist. Like that's et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of cultural hangovers. If you're looking for material goods, like something like that Che T-shirt, the Che T-shirt really is like the sort of the crown jewel of it, I think. And you've put me on the spot a little bit here. I'd have to think about. I'm sure that there are others that, whether we're conscious or unconscious of where they originated from. Yeah, like that's that might actually be really interesting to sort of see how that thread works. That's a really interesting thing to think about. But lots of those things where there's got to be lots of things. If toss them into the comments if you guys can think of any other than that Che T-shirt, of material items that sort of began through the Cold War but continue now, and we may have lost that association. The way someone commenting that they love the way that I say guerrilla. Guerrilla in English, guerrilla in Spanish. It's a Spanish word, guerrilla. We recorded another episode on Cuba today. I'm not going to tell you any more than that, but we did another episode on Cuba today, and I was practicing my terrible, terrible Spanish, so that's guerrilla seems to be forefront of my mind at the moment. So, Merck, it'd be cool if we ever did the breakup of Yugoslavia. 100%. We're going to look at. I don't know if we're necessarily going to do the Balkan Wars, but we'll certainly look at least an overview. I don't know if what's left of my heart and my soul can look at an in-depth view of the breakup of Yugoslavia. I was a teenager, obsessed with the news while all that was going on. It's a very close subject. So that's we want to look at it. That's something that that the Cold War ends in, I mean, there's a variety of dates, but certainly, December 26th, 1991, the Cold War is over. There's no question on that. But the hangover, like the impacts of the Cold War, certainly continue well beyond that. So there's lots of stuff in there to be able to look at. So what's the book in front of me on the desk where we film? That is the Soviet Encyclopedia. It's my producer. Our producer managed to snag. I don't know if that's his own personal copy or if that's a copy that he managed to snag when we were setting everything up. But that's what that is. That's the Soviet Encyclopedia. So it hides my hands now that I've learned how to hold them still and not move them and flail them around like I did in the first year and a half kind of thing. We worked on that. I'm an expressive and I'm an emotive talker a lot of the times. Sort of nailing my hands to the desk kind of thing. But that's the book that's sitting there. Let's see, where else? Where are we here? How about Tito's? Sorry, Gialine. How about Tito's death? That would be nice. Would it be nice that we talk about Tito's death, or just like the fact that he died was nice? There's a lot of people from that area of Europe that miss Tito. And every time that we do an episode on Tito, and I refer to Tito as a dictator or as as a dictatorship, I get lots of people yelling at me in the comments that Tito couldn't possibly have been a dictator because the people loved him. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. Lots of people loved him. He was still a dictator. We'll take a look at Tito, his death, and certainly like the beginning of the breakup of Yugoslavia through the 80s with like the rise of ultranationalism and all those things. Once Tito's dead. So, how is my dog? I have two dogs. They are both downstairs right now. They both had baths this morning because they absolutely stank. And they're both mad at my wife and I for having dared to put them in the bath. So they're downstairs sleeping off their rage. So they're good. Here we go. An unrelated question just to shake stuff up. Do I have a favorite beer? I'm not sure that I necessarily have a favorite beer. There's a couple of Belgian beers that I can, for the life of me, I can't think of them right now. I can see it. I can see it's a Belgian beer. It's got a little gnome on it, and it's killing me that I can't think of it right now. I'm a beer drinker. I've been drinking a lot less of it recently, but I'm a beer drinker. I like beer. I am currently drinking this beer. For anybody who's curious, is a sour ale. It is called a margarita. It's a margarita flavor. It has lime and habanero in it. And my beer is actually spicy. It tastes like nachos. I'm not sure I'm going to buy this again, but it's certainly an interesting flavor profile. So. Otherwise, do I have a favorite leisure beverage? I drink a lot of coffee. I drink a lot of tea. I drink a lot of water. In terms of if I'm going to drink alcohol, when I do, it's going to be either beer or scotch. Single malt, please. Not too peaty, like the Dalwhinnie 15. Dalmore has some nice selections. Anyways, those would be my leisure beverages of choice. So. Dave Davis, will the Carnation Revolution get an episode? It will get an episode. We haven't done one as of yet. And I keep realizing this every time that we do an episode or like a live stream and somebody asks me, hey, what about Portugal? I keep remembering, oh my God, we haven't done the Carnation Revolution yet. And Salazar and how they got rid of Salazar. But we're going to do that. We absolutely need to do that. So, let's see. Satish, have I ever traveled to Eastern Bloc nations during the communist era? No, I didn't. I moved to Hungary in 1990. So like the summer of 1990. So that was less than a year after, since the communist government had been replaced and sort of transitioning through into to democracy. So I was never there during the communist period, but I was there immediately afterward, and got to watch firsthand as a lot of those structures were dismantled and more capitalist structures were reestablished back into Hungary. Really, in retrospect, at the time it was like, okay, whatever, I just live here. In retrospect, absolutely fascinating time to be there. So, but no, never traveled there during the actual communist period. So, let's see. Somebody asking about Agent Orange. Yeah, we'll take a look at the rainbow agents. John Lee. Every time I think of Kissinger, the only thing that comes to my mind is his appearance on The Simpsons. That's the one where Henry Kissinger loses his glasses in the toilet and Homer finds them. It makes me laugh. So. Have we incorporated any AI tools into my workflow? No, absolutely not. AI tools as they stand right now, I don't even think they should be able to call them AI, because it's not. It's an advanced, it's a prediction, like it's a word prediction based on a really advanced data scraper. There's no artificial intelligence to it. So no, I don't trust AI. Right now, I don't trust AI in terms of this in the slightest. Absolutely not. Do I know what it's going to look like in a year and 5 years? No, I don't. I'm assuming that it's going to get better and it's going to become more effective. As it stands right now, it's not something that I would ever trust or touch to use to produce content, to present. Like, that's not, there's ethical issues aside. I have no trust that it's accurate. There was I just read a story the other day that there was a lawyer, I must have been I think it was in the US, but there was a lawyer who used ChatGPT to basically to create a brief, like for a case that he presented in front of a judge, and the AI made up case references. And then when the judge wanted to see those case references, the lawyer went back to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT falsified a bunch of cases again. So obviously that lawyer is going to jail and he's going to get debarred. But yeah, like I don't trust it. Like, it's just not. It's not at any fit state at the moment. It's doing a disservice to me. It's certainly doing a disservice to you guys. So no AI. Very timely and pressing question though. Let's see. I don't know if Meredith is still in here. That's for anybody who's interested. It's Bitchy History asking if I've tried that habanero beer monstrosity yet. Yes, Meredith, I am trying the habanero beer monstrosity right now. It's not as bad as it could be. So there we go. My favorite dish from Europe. Europe's a really big place. Once upon a time, I had this really nice coffee mug from Poland. I think that's still packed away somewhere, but that's probably my favorite dish from Europe. So, which I understand is completely missing the point of your question. But could we do some stuff on Japan? So, Josiah, we've done a bunch of things on Japan. Probably a year and a half ago, we looked at Japanese economic recovery. We've looked at the Kuril Islands. We've done a few episodes on Japan. We'll probably come back around to revisit other aspects of Japan, including the self-defense force. But that's probably still a ways off. So we're going to come back around to Japan, but not. I wouldn't anticipate anything on Japan in the immediate future. So, yeah, let's see. Grand Dessert. Yes, La Chouffe. Thank you. That's the Belgian gnome beer. It's La Chouffe. It's that would be one of my favorite beers of all time. First time I ever tried, random stories. First time I ever tried that, I was in Amsterdam, and she was my girlfriend at the time, but my wife now. We were there for a few days. I was coming back from a work trip. She met me in Amsterdam. Spent a weekend there. We were wandering back our way back to the hotel and just sort of wandered into what amounted to be a local pub bar. Practically empty, just sort of sat down at the bar. Gentleman behind the bar clearly knew that we weren't Dutch, immediately spoke to us in English, asked us what he could get us, and we just sort of looked at him blankly. It's like, I don't know, it's like, what would you suggest? Which sometimes in the right kind of bar, that is a fantastic question. And he proceeded to just sort of like pour little samples of a bunch of different beers. And one of those was La Chouffe. And it was just like, that was a love at first taste kind of moment. There's a few bars here in Toronto where I live that have La Chouffe on tap. And from time to time, if I feel like venturing downtown, I will go down and sit and have a couple of pints. But yes, thank you very much. It's La Chouffe, which is a Belgian beer. It has this crazy little gnome dude on it. And that's how I usually remember him, is the gnome beer when I completely stumble and fall apart and forget. So there we go. Let's see. Maybe something a little less bar related for the moment. What other questions do we have here? I think Robbie from military history. It's been a long day, guys. My thoughts on who should be the new Spurs manager. For my sins, for those of you who care, I am a Spurs supporter. Clearly, I've been a terrible, terrible person in life. I wouldn't wish anybody that job right now. I feel bad for anybody who takes it. Leave Ryan Mason in charge. Whatever. That's. And yes, I think Robbie, that I'll be throwing some support behind Luton next year, simply because I think they have a better chance of winning games than Spurs do. So, yeah, let's take a look here. Will I show you the subway lines that the Soviet Union built in Budapest, Prague, and Warsaw as compensation for Allied invasion? I'm going to ask my own question here, Tom. Is that true? Were those subway systems built as compensation for Allied invasion? The Budapest subway system predates the line 1, which is the yellow line that runs under András út. Is actually the oldest subway in continental Europe, dating from I want to say either like 1899 or 1901 or something. The expansions were certainly built past the Second World War, but I don't know. If anybody can answer that question, that's actually a really interesting question. Whether they were built as compensation for. Or did you mean like that they were dug as like bomb shelters? Because that's actually very true. There's a ton of subway shelters, subway stations that were built with the secondary purposes being bomb shelters. I think Arsenalnaya in Kiev is it was at one point anyways, that was the deepest subway station in the world. Like, you look at the escalator, it just seems to go on and on forever. And that was very much built and designed around this idea that it would act as a that's but if anybody can answer that, that's really interesting. For anybody who wants to really fascinating, if we're ever, certainly for myself in the West, going to Moscow isn't a particularly appealing prospect at the moment, if I could even get there. But the subway system is phenomenal, especially the older stations, maybe not the ones necessarily reaching out into the suburbs, or what were the suburbs, but certainly the ones inside the Circle Line. in Moscow are phenomenal. Treacherous in the winter because of all the marble and no grip, but absolutely gorgeous works of art in and of themselves. Yeah, that's Professor What. I get asked this question every so often. What are some of my favorite history channels on YouTube? This is my dirty little secret, which isn't really necessarily a secret, but I don't watch YouTube. I don't have the attention span to be able to sit and watch 20 minutes on my computer. I can sit and read a book, but watching, and I apologize for everyone out there. I have no good recommendations beyond the Cold War and Kings and Generals. I don't watch a lot of YouTube. Sometimes I have the attention span of a guppy. So yeah, that's dirty little secret. So, which isn't really a secret because I just announced it to the world, but let's see. Alex Kudsin asking if we're going to cover the rearmament and militarization of Japan. I think you probably asked that question before I mentioned it as part of answering a different question there. So yeah, I want to take a look at the Japanese self-defense force as a historical item, and then sort of how it's progressed. Even sort of link, though, that's one of these subjects that if you can link it through to the present, yeah, like it's one of those things that Japan is very much in the process of rearming itself, what with the changing strategic situation in East Asia. So yeah, that's definitely want to take a look at that and hopefully be able to sort of string that and link that through into the present. So is there something about the Cold War I want to cover but feel is too controversial or won't get views? So those are two different questions. I don't think that there's really too much that's too controversial. We try to keep everything rooted in historical fact. And as long as we do that, I mean, the controversy, it can be controversial, but we're talking to you about the known facts. We may add speculation. We'll let you know if it's speculation. But in terms of that controversy, there's very little that we would avoid because of controversy. Are there subjects that I'd like to cover that won't get views? Yeah, tons and tons of them. The episode from 2 weeks ago, I want to say, on Empire Windrush and the birth of multiculturalism in the UK. That was, and I'm going to toot my own horn. Excuse me, I'm going to toot my own horn here. That was a fantastic episode. Really, really good. But it's not getting a lot of views. It's one of those subjects that's really important and it has direct linkages into the present day, but not a lot of people have watched it. We will do those episodes from time to time, but obviously this channel. We do this channel. I mean, part of the reason that we do this channel is because we like getting a bit of money for it. Like for some of us that are involved, this is our full-time job. We can't continually pick topics that we know aren't going to get views. So yeah, that's certainly, I don't know if that I'm possibly rambling a little bit here, but your question very much is there's two separate questions there. Controversy, we're not necessarily shy about controversy because we are sticking to the historical truth. Won't get views. Yeah, I mean there's lots out there. I'd like to do more on sports, like sports in the Cold War. But the few times that we've tried it, like those episodes do, they fall flat. We can't keep doing those and expect to be able to continue to bring you guys an episode every week. It doesn't work that way. If you guys can go out there and get a few thousand, each of you get a few thousand of your friends to watch, and get a few thousand of your friends to watch, then yeah, we can do all kinds of really weird niche topics. But that's challenging. So, Tom, just answering my question there. It's like, yeah, according to Polish radio. Interesting. I'm going to, I'll have to take a look into that. That's actually a really interesting fact that I didn't know about. I'll have to, I want to take a look into that. That's really, really interesting. So, yeah, that's, what got me obsessed with the Cold War? I'm a child of the Cold War. Like, I was born in the late 70s. I grew up in the 80s, where I can remember most of the 80s. I played a lot of video games in the late 80s, especially a lot of flight sim type stuff that were dealing with, that used the Cold War as sort of their backdrop in terms of what, like, mission settings, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, like that's probably where it started. Tom Clancy is probably to blame in a lot of ways. Hunt for Red October, Cardinal of the Kremlin, Red Storm Rising, those types of things. Yeah, that's probably where I'm like, I don't know if obsession just has such a terrible connotation to it. That's probably where the interest really does come from. So, yeah, that's note. The B Night 3, was Rhodesia covered yet? Nope. We have not looked at Rhodesia as of yet. We will. We just haven't gotten there yet. So, will we cover Cuba's intervention in Africa, like Angola and the Ogaden War? Yes, absolutely. The Cuban experience in the Cold War is really interesting, because it takes on this almost this. I'm not going to say it's not Maoist. Like, they're not Maoists. They're Marxists, but while the Soviet Union was trying to practice a larger policy of peaceful coexistence, the Cubans and Fidel were very much taking this idea of taking Soviet Marxism and then combining it with the idea of exporting revolution and global revolution. And that's how you end up with Cuban troops in Angola and during the Ogaden War. And the entire premise of the movie Red Dawn is based on that idea that Cuba is going to come and invade everybody. So that's, yeah, stay tuned for that. We're still a little ways out from that, but we absolutely will be taking a look at that, because that's just a really fascinating piece of, like, who'd have thought Cuba would be like sending troops to, that's just one of those things. So, let's see. I'm moving through here. I've been talking for about an hour and 20 minutes now. So, the fact that there's still 67 of you here is actually quite amazing. Thank you. Excuse me. I want to see something on the Summit series of 72. The Summit series, I'd like to do something. This is coming back to what I was just talking about with sports. I'd like to do something on the Summit series. The Summit series is really, really important, especially for Canadians. We wear it as a point of pride. It's this really big deal. When you get outside of Canada, the Summit series doesn't mean a whole hell of a lot. The Miracle on Ice means a whole lot more in the US, obviously. But the Soviets don't know a whole hell of a lot about the Summit series either. I was in Moscow in 1990. What was that? The summer of '98. I met Tretiak, which was really cool, because like, oh my god, it's Tretiak. Like, it's like shake his hand, like do all those things, and then have conversations with some other like Russians that were around me. They have no idea. Like, a bit older than I was. Like, certainly would have been adults or like teenagers kind of thing when the Summit series was going on. Didn't mean anything to them. We wear, like Canadians wear the Summit series like a badge of pride. How much coverage, like, this is coming back to this viewership thing. I would love to do the Summit series and sort of get into depth on it. And, so we do an episode per game, whatever that happens to be. How many people are going to watch it? I don't know. Might do it anyways and find out. So, yeah, but that's one of those interesting things where perspective matters a lot when we do with any kind of topic. So it's, yeah. Let's see. Somebody just said poop. Okay. Let's what's my favorite fictional depiction of the Cold War? And how annoyed do I get about the inaccuracies? My favorite fictional depiction in a book is still going to be it's always going to be Red Storm Rising. Just because I have a soft spot. I have an affection for it. Just because, how old I was when I read it. all of those things, how many times I read it. And it's just it's formulaic. I mean, you sort of know, you can see how it's going to break down, how it's all going to turn out. But it was just fun. Movie depictions, favorite fictional depiction of that. I mean, The Hunt for Red October is just that movie. I'm sticking with Tom Clancy. There's a theme here, clearly. Like Tom Clancy, like he was a good idea guy, prolific, all those things. The Hunt for Red October, like that movie, the book is better, but the movie is just so well done and so well put together. And Sean Connery, even with his terrible accent, like all of those things. It's just, and you know how old I was when I watched it, all those things. That's really one of my favorite depictions. So, how annoyed do I get about inaccuracies? My opinion, and this is how I sort of apply things with a lot of like artistic endeavor, movies and TV shows especially. Tell me a good story. Like, tell me a story that's fun, and I will forgive you for the inaccuracies. If we made all of our TV and all of our art and all of our things 100% accurate to life, it would be boring as shit. Like, let's be honest. Like, let artistic license and let artistic license happen. The willing suspension of disbelief. Like, those are important for being able to tell a story, especially if it's a piece of fiction. If it's a documentary, then that's something different. Like, stick to the facts, stick to the truth. But if it's a piece of fiction, okay, like, let's get over the inaccuracies and let the story be told. To me, that's the more important part in a piece of fiction. Let's see. Kate asking about my educational background. I have completed an undergrad degree in history, and I am somewhere in the middle of my master's degree in military history. So that would be my educational background. So for better or for worse, that's where it's at right now. So Coltrane, Holodomor, and Lysenko. Holodomor we will not be touching. That is outside of the scope of the channel, simply based on when it happened. We look at post-1945 events. We will obviously go into pre-1945 stuff to begin a story. We've talked about the Holodomor, but we will not be doing an episode dedicated to looking at the Holodomor. So, in museums, David is allowed to touch the art. No, I'm not Chuck Norris. Like, I don't get to do things like that. I would get banned and thrown out just like everybody else. So if you're not supposed to touch the art, don't touch the art. So asking an episode on Bader Meinhof and the Italian Red Brigades. We absolutely will be doing episodes on those, on them. Red Army faction, Bader Meinhof, the Italian Red Brigades. Fascinating stories, really interesting, and certainly ties into what someone was asking about previously with the Italian and French Communist parties, that relation between East and West Germany, and like all of those things. We'll be taking a look at that for sure. That's some people joining us. John, you're spamming the chat with the question about doing Doi Moi in Vietnam. Remind me what Doi Moi is, and I can maybe comment if we're going to do one. As much as I seem like a fount of all knowledge, I'm not. So help a brother out. Let's see. Can I make an episode about a niche topic that no one cares about? If my producer will let me, yes, I will. So the Sino-Vietnamese War. That, John, we are definitely going to be taking a look at. The Sino-Vietnamese War is absolutely fascinating, in that it's like the numbers involved are kind of staggering to some degree. The impacts and the effects of it, where the Chinese sort of marched in, beat the Vietnamese, but took huge losses. and sort of like, decided that they couldn't stick around, declared that they were the winners, and got the hell back to China, and then realized that they were going to have to begin a complete and total modernization of their armed forces, not only from an equipment standpoint, but in terms of how they did their training, how they did their education, all of those things. And that's really the Sino-Vietnamese War, where you start seeing the rise of the kernel and that rise of China becoming putting itself on the road to become a global military power. Let's see. James, we'll be making more of the World in Blank series that started like basically the year in review. Yeah, we're going to come back to those. We put those on the shelf for a little bit. They tend to be longer episodes, like double the length sometimes. They're a lot of work to do. They're a lot of work to write. They're a lot of work to put together from a production sense. So we put those on the shelf, but we are going to be coming back to them because they're interesting. They're fun. And I think like over the long term, they're worth the effort that we put into them. So, but we'll be coming back to those. So, do I have a job outside of presenting one of the best YouTube history channels? If by that you mean this one, yeah, I do. Me personally, I do this. I have a part-time job every afternoon in the afternoons that I do in a business that I've worked in for a very, very long time. And I'm also a student. I'm a grad student. So those are my three jobs. And then I have a family and kids and all those things too. So that's those aren't jobs per se, but they're certainly a big part of my life. So let's see. John Lee asking, are we going to be taking a look at other Southeast Asian conflicts? Yeah, we will, like the conflict in Laos, Cambodia. Certainly, we still haven't done anything on Thailand, and I'd like to do something more on. I'd like to do something on Thailand, just because I think they play there's an interesting role that Thailand plays, like and certainly through the Cold War as well. That's. Rezak, the Chinese Civil War is very interesting. The more I learn about it, the more I get amazed. Yeah, the Chinese Civil War is, I don't want to say it didn't dawn on me, but I didn't really quite understand the huge and significant impact in the way that it fed into the way that China exists, certainly through the Cold War, but certainly in the present. And sort of like that, the way that the U.S. involved itself but didn't involve itself, and this hands-off approach from Asia, this whole thing, the Chinese Civil War is actually really interesting. We might possibly come back and do a little bit more work with that at some point. I'm not sure where we stand with that now, but no, you're right. It's absolutely something worth taking a deeper look at. John, answering my question, Domoy is the economic reform in Vietnam in the 1980s after China's economic reform. We probably will absolutely take a look at that. Before we get to Domoy, though, we need to get through the actual, the American War in Vietnam. So we've got to get through that portion of it first. There is a full plan to us. And certainly, I mean, that obviously translates into the 90s with Vietnam opening itself up, back up to the world and back up to the West, especially. And if I can do that with some Vietnamese coffee, instead of just this, then I will certainly do that, because if anybody out there has never had Vietnamese style coffee, do yourself a favor and go find some. It is the best thing. It's heavenly. It's delicious. Go try it if you haven't. So with or without pho and with or without a banh mi sandwich. Anyways, that's at this point, my God, it is 9:00 my time. According to my phone, it's saying that it's still 28 degrees here. It is hot as all. Yeah, it's really fucking hot here. Hopefully looking for a little bit of a respite sooner than later. But I do have dogs that I need to go take for a walk now that it's hopefully cooling down a little bit. I'm going to finish my spicy beer. I never thought I'd say those words before in my life. yeah, hopefully this worked as a time for a few people, different that may not have been able to sort of join in with the ones that were happening during the day. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. If you have any questions, concerns, anything, I mean, shoot us an email to thecoldwar@gmail.com. One last little thing at the end here. I'm going to give a little plug. As I said, I'm not a YouTube guy. I am a podcast guy. Podcasts are great because I'm out walking dogs, I'm driving kids around, whatever that happens to be. Podcasts are fantastic. I'm going to plug a couple of podcasts right now. Give these guys, go check them out on whatever your podcast catcher of choice is. I will lead with, as always, Cold War Conversations with my friend Ian. He is in the process of recording oral histories with people of all different backgrounds and walks of life who experienced and lived through different things through the Cold War. There's former military, there's intelligence officers, there's bus drivers, there's Trabi owners, like there's all kinds of stuff. Like he's got a few hundred episodes, at least a few hundred episodes at this point. Go check it out, Cold War Conversations. You will not be disappointed. I learn something new every single Saturday when a new episode gets released. There's a couple of things that are sort of like more present. There's something, a podcast called Talk Eastern Europe, which is worth checking out if you're into sort of updates on the current situation in Eastern European politics. Talk Eastern Europe is excellent. If you're looking for a more broad perspective, and more sort of global events, there's a podcast called The Red Line, which is absolutely fantastic. That's every 2 weeks. There's a new episode, and Michael interviews 3 or 4 guests, usually talking about like something that's centered around a particular topic. Totally worth your time. Really, really excellent. Mark Galliotti hosts a podcast called In Moscow's Shadows, and he's British, but he is perfectly fluent in Russian and very much up to date on Russian politics. He specializes in crime and the underground, but he's obviously spent a lot of time looking at talking about the current war in Ukraine, but also looking at how that's impacting things in Moscow. Great set of perspectives that are coming from Mark on In Moscow's Shadows. 2 more to plug. The Eurasian Knot, which used to be Sean's Russia blog, the SRB podcast, but is now called the Eurasian Knot. And that is more long format stories, like audio stories, talking about very much focused on Eurasian topics. There's a lot of Russia focused type things, but there's some excellent episodes that are well worth your time to go check out on that. And finally, and last but not least, there is a new podcast that I started listening to, and it's more to fill in a lot of gaps in terms of my knowledge of American history. And that is something called Bitchy History. And that is hosted by Meredith, who I believe is actually in this chat, or she was in this chat not too long ago. It is sarcastic and sardonic, and certainly an excellent and very, very well researched and very well presented look at American history. Well worth your time to go and check it out. So that's a few recommendations for me on the podcast front for those who are interested. All of that being said, thank you very much for joining me. Have a great rest of your evening or the rest of your day or wherever you happen to be in your day. I'm going to go finish a beer. And remember, history isn't black and white. It's always shades of gray. Talk to you guys later.